And Francis, we're doing okay with that for numbers? Oh, I think you're muted.
I would say we're a little over half at the moment,
Great,
but
great.
yeah.
We'll just take another minute or two and then start off the presentation.
Are we recording it? Yes, we are.
And just for the folks who have joined, the way we've set up the call is, I'll hand it over to Francis shortly, but we'll be going through the aspects of the business case. It'll be live after this call online, and so you'll be able to access it. We won't be necessarily going through it in detail because the document's quite lengthy. It's about 75 pages long, but we'll be pointing to you to areas that you can go look in for further review at a later point. And we also have left some time at the end for Q&A period. So we have about 10 minutes at the end. So we ask that as we go through, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Francis will be monitoring them, or you can note them down and save them for the end, and then we'll open up the floor at the very end for any questions. Yep. All right, it looks like we have a decent number of folks. Francis, I can go to our first slide here, and then if you want to start things off with regards to the mission and the product team.
All right. Thanks everyone for meeting and joining us today and taking your time to go over this project that we've been working on for a good half of 2025. And so, as you're very well aware, the Ottawa Basketball Sport Hosting Improvement Business Case, this was really developed and recognized as a need through several key partners and stakeholders in the basketball community and in the city of Ottawa. And this final business case is a key resource that will represent the needs of the basketball community in Ottawa, and it's really going to help inform different initiatives, infrastructure development, conversations, and also in 2026, we're looking at the City of Ottawa's indoor sport court strategy. And so the development of this was at key timelines with that indoor sport court strategy underway for 2026. And it really is here as a strategic recommendation that reflects the needs of the basketball community in Ottawa. It's sustainable growth in sport for tournament hosting opportunities as well. And the intent is to inspire the local champions to take action while also informing city-led strategies that can provide key supports required for basketball's continued development. In order to put this key project together, it was an extensive collaboration with many, many different stakeholders and community members, not just Ottawa and local, but even nationally across Canada, between the Ottawa Sport Council, the Ottawa Basketball Network, and Ottawa Tourism. And so, with the three of us, the Ottawa Sport Council, Ottawa Basketball Network, and Ottawa Tourism, we were really working with both the greater and the sport community in terms of connecting and bringing together the basketball community in different ways and for different parts of this project. The Ottawa Sport Council, we serve as a leader for amateur and community sports. We're in partnership with the City of Ottawa, and we're dedicated to driving policy programs and infrastructure as well as access improvements for to better serve the community. We also have the Ottawa Basketball Network, which connects, advocates, and enables the local basketball community. and groups through promotion and advocacy for barrier-free access. And also with Ottawa Tourism is the destination marketing organization for Ottawa and surrounding region through industry leadership and destination marketing in Ottawa. They were a key project collaborator. They provided insight guidance to align the project with the goals of sport hosting, including economic hosting projections. And so with that, we really want to highlight today the intent for the meeting today is really about a high-level overview of the recommendations and findings from this analysis. This is our first public presentation of the final business case. It is already live on the Ottawa Sport Council website, which I'll add into the chat. And so it's a public document. We want it to be shared and used. And if you have any further questions after this presentation and business case with the Greater, the Ottawa Sport Council, you can directly reach me and I'd be happy to connect with you to further conversations around this project. And also, before we kick off the rest of our meeting today, I'm just gonna bring this up. We just wanted to also, before we get started, have a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the land on which the RA, which is where we currently are, RA Center sits, is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. The RA respects the spiritual, cultural, and historical significance of the land upon which we work and play, and we support the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada's call to action. We will continue to learn, create awareness, and strengthen our relationship with the Indigenous peoples in the spirit of reconciliation. And so just again, thank you everyone for being part of this call today, and I will pass it over to the Greater.
Thanks, Francis.
Awesome. Thank you, Francis. Great to see you all and to be joined by such an awesome group who want to learn more about this work that we've done, the important work and the opportunities ahead. I'm Matt Logue-Lee. I'm one of the co-founders of the Greater, and I'm our managing partner here with the firm. We provide strategic counsel to a wide variety of organizations across the country, but we have a real specialty working with sports organizations at all levels. So local sport organizations, local sport initiatives, up to the provincial regional bodies, national sports organizations, the Olympic and Paralympic committees, as well as many pro sport organizations. We set out to build a business a little bit different. We wanted to build a for-profit entity in the form of a strategic consulting firm, but also something in the form of a social enterprise. So we donate half of our profit every year back into the community to a wide variety of organizations, also increasingly in the sports space. And as of this year, actually, our number just got updated. It says 325 on the screen. We're now at $400,000 committed to 20 plus organizations since we started. We do operate out of Toronto, but we operate all across the country as well. So thank you for those that we got to see in person through this process as well in Ottawa. So I'll pass over to Emily to introduce herself and then to take through the beginning content with you all.
Thanks, Matt. Like Matt said, my name is Emily Drake. I'm a strategist here at the Greater. My pronouns are she, her. And I love sport. I love research. So this project is right up my alley. So I'll start off by going through the topics that we'll be covering today. We'll be outlining the project process, which was grounded in 3 lines of inquiry. So you can think of this kind of as our 3 hypotheses or 3 main questions that we were asking. The first was, how does infrastructure meet the demand of community basketball in Ottawa? And the NCR is the National Capital Region. So we did kind of a larger area that we considered. How does infrastructure meet needs for hosting opportunities, and what options exist to increase infrastructure with a focus on the merit of a new purpose-built facility? So with those 3 things in mind, we'll also be presenting some notable findings that we had regarding the current state of basketball in Ottawa and then broadly across the country, and include our survey, interview, and focus group insights, because we did engagements across all 3. We'll also go into some options that exist to increase infrastructure at varying levels of investment and impact, and then finish the presentation off with our 5 key recommendations that really should be considered in action as the next steps and as infrastructure development is pursued and thought about. So I'm going to start off with presenting some of our key insights and our 5 recommendations, just to get everyone on the same page. And then, like I said, we'll go more deeply through the presentation. But as an overview, we had some really notable insights from the community, which was that the largest barrier to basketball right now is the lack of appropriate indoor facilities. So there's a high reliance on outdoor courts and single court venues, primarily school gyms, which becomes really difficult for year-round needs and also reduces the opportunity to host. And it creates, a really fragmented approach across the city with a lot of fatigue and strain on organizers and athletes and those sorts of things. So that was a main challenge. There are multiple options to expand access. As you might have seen with different sports and that sort of thing. For this, obviously, we focus specifically on basketball, but a lot of different options at varying levels of capital investment. And that the investment in basketball infrastructure really represents an opportunity for inclusive, sustainable, and economically productive community asset. And it also reflects the momentum in basketball across the country. We see this in different facets, and we'll kind of chat to those. And then lastly, having local champions. So some of you folks on this line, perhaps, and folks in Ottawa, who have a coordinated effort across the basketball and sport sector is really essential. So those insights then framed our key recommendations, which number 1 is recruiting a champion. This is, a single term, but it's thought of as perhaps a collective group to really champion the basketball community and lead the coordinated effort. The second, as Francis made mention to, 2026 in the upcoming indoor sports court strategy, is that the City of Ottawa should name basketball as one of the priority sports in that document. Number 3 is investing in purpose-built indoor basketball infrastructure to advance both community basketball as well as hosting. The 4th is building with intention and prioritizing specifications and considering accessibility, considering location, making sure you meet the needs of equity-deserving groups is critical. And then lastly is increasing support and collaboration with school boards, as schools are the primary approach to basketball in Ottawa right now, and being able to expand accessibility and availability of those facilities is really helpful. So coming off of the insights and recommendations, walk you through a bit of our methodology on how was this business case even developed. So we started with doing current state assessment and, working with our friends at the Ottawa Basketball Network and Ottawa Tourism and the OSC to really get the documents and go through the history of basketball in the community. And then we led different community engagements. So we had a survey that was in market for 5 weeks with 95 participants. We had stakeholder interviews with various folks from both Ottawa and then across the country to get their insights on if perhaps they have a facility that they're operating. What does that look like? As well as, tournament hosting, all those sorts of things. So we ran 14 of those. And then we held a couple of those focus groups throughout this just to kind of pressure test the document and see where it was at, get feedback from community. Some of you folks might be on the call, and thank you for your time. So we held those, and we had about 20 attendees. And then what that informed was essentially, the 3 lines of inquiry that we came up with, case studies. We did a number of case studies for this document, our feasibility component, and then the 5 recommendations that were really key to moving this work forward. So as we go into kind of level setting the current state of basketball and what that looks like, we see that, basketball is trending. There's a major growth opportunity across the country. For starters, it's a top 3 sport for youth, with 43% of youth across Canada engaging with it in the last couple of years. It's one of the fastest rising choices because of accessibility, lower costs, it's a community-based sport. We see that also it's popular within youth with disabilities and amongst the Black, South Asian, Arab, and mixed race youth. So there's a diversity component about the sport and kind of calling people into the sport, which is really important. Then we look at basketball in Ottawa specifically, and as per some numbers from the OBA, we see that enrollment is really taking off. So if we look at Ontario Basketball Association and affiliated clubs in the city, there's over 10,000 participants, which is comparable to Hockey East Ontario numbers. And then when we think about the split, we see that there's a 70-30 split between boys and girls. And with the momentum of, basketball for women and girls, we see this as a really big opportunity to perhaps balance this out a little bit more, but also the growth that you could have for all genders, really. And then thinking about, what does this look like? We have these numbers, but how do we kind of create a narrative around it? We looked at the Ottawa Shooting Stars. They're kind of an example of a club in Ottawa that's nearly increased tenfold in the last 14 years. So that just shows alone, like they have 5 more competitive teams, they have multiple house leagues. But if infrastructure isn't matching that, then it becomes quite challenging on the community to be able to meet those needs. So that's the state of recreational basketball. And then when we focus in on Ottawa, and like many communities, we're looking at schools and we're looking at outdoor courts as the primary core infrastructure to operate this programming. So we think about the City of Ottawa's Parks and Recreation Facilities Master Plan, and if there's a clear commitment in that document to increase inventory of outdoor courts. And this is unusual in Canadian ecosystems. It's common for casual engagement. It works in summer months. It's across Canada. It's an approach that's used. And, it can work to a degree. However, when we think about organized play and, the numbers growing and everything like that, outdoor courts are not the best. Indoor courts are better suited. And due to a variety of reasons, including weather, upkeep, suitability for competition, hosting opportunities. So this really outlines that there's a huge opportunity in Ottawa and across the country to more explicitly recognize and commit to more indoor courts as they serve a really unique purpose. And this also helps with safety precautions, like I said, mitigating lack of staffing, routine supervision that you might have with outdoor courts. You could then change this with indoor courts and make it a better place to be. So transitioning this into kind of the narrative that's thought about with basketball is where, all you need is a ball and a hoop. This actually doesn't really represent where the community is and where the sport is, because we see growth in organized basketball requires safe and reliable venues. There's program coordination that's needed. So you need the investment to match the demand and the opportunity to host. So changing our narrative from an increase in court space as a solution and having any increase be beneficial to a strategic coordinated vision to expand indoor infrastructure, with dedicated times for certain groups and for programming and that sort of thing. So that's the landscape scan when we think of current state. Now, when we transition to what we heard in our findings from community stakeholders, I'll ground us again in our first line of inquiry specifically, which is how does infrastructure meet the demand of community basketball in Ottawa and the National Capital Region? So when we did our landscape scan, obviously we see that there's a lot of interest in basketball, and that was validated through our community engagement. So some key themes coming out of that is that the city's focus on outdoor courts does not align with basketball's pathway for growth in the city. We see that 90% of our survey respondents disagree that there are enough facilities. That's quite a prominent amount. We also see that the survey results show that only 13% of basketball activity is accounted for in outdoor public courts. So that's a big one. The second one is the over-reliance on school gyms with no quality controls or allocated court time. So by and large, availability was the largest issue with access, or the largest problem with accessing facilities. And so you can even see on the chart on the top right-hand side, availability skyrockets above the rest. So this is a big challenge. And, some people noted that the public-private partnership model that's used in Ottawa with other sports allows a lot of opportunity. Perhaps this could be something that's pursued within the basketball space. And we'll get into that a little bit later, but just to note. And then lastly is that the growing demand is putting pressure on an already strained system. So there are 74% of survey respondents agree that there are far more people who want to play basketball in Ottawa than there are opportunities. So they're either traveling outside the city, they're being put on wait lists. They just can't get access to the sport. So that's a challenge that's being faced right now. When we look at our second line of inquiry, which is how does infrastructure meet the needs for hosting opportunities, we see that school gyms, if you're looking at our key themes, are not a viable solution for hosting amateur tournaments. You have this soundbite on the top right. someone said, as with the U14 OBA Cup, which some of you might have participated in, the biggest challenge for the U17, U19s was operating 14 locations to provide 16 courts. As you can imagine, that's a lot of strain. That's a lot of difficulty put on, volunteers, organizers, athletes themselves, families, that sort of thing. So it affects the whole system when it's so fragmented. Because as of right now, school facilities are the main hosting venues, and they're dispersed. They have single gyms. So there's a lot of challenges that are faced with this. Second is this innovative approach to hosting solutions. So, Ottawa will be hosting the 2026 Wheelchair Basketball World Championships. So this is bringing some of the top athletes in wheelchair basketball from all across the world to the city, which is fantastic. But because of the lack of courts and having centralized spaces to play, this has been quite a challenge and is something that they're overcoming from the hosting committee to, utilize temporary courts, set them up at Rogers Centre, set them into place, utilize some of the university systems to try and make this tournament the best that it can be. So they have to be quite innovative and think on the fly. And then lastly is the legacy component. So when we build these legacy facilities, they have significant long-term returns. You look at the Toronto Pan Am Centre, you look at the Meridian Centre, Niagara for the Canada Games. They've become now hubs and destinations for sport hosting because they have these premier facilities. So it's just definitely something to consider. And then as well, we had, a large majority saying that hosting events greatly contributes to the basketball community and popularity of the sport. So there's a strong sentiment there. And then specifically when we look at hosting basketball events, there's some considerations to have, but overall there's considerable appetite in the community for multiple types of events. People feel that they would greatly contribute, but there's also several factors that have to be considered, such as affordability, family-friendly environments, game day entertainment. But this is just a snapshot to show you there's appetite here. People have insight on kind of what they want to see and how they want to experience events. So it could be used in future. And once this document goes live, you'll have access to all these charts and all this data, which is fantastic. So that's where that fits. And then when we go to our last line of inquiry, which is what options exist to increase infrastructure with a focus on the merit of a new purpose-built facility. You'll see this slide here, and I'll go into a bit of detail on it. So there are multiple options to increase infrastructure, and they have varying levels of investment, varying levels of impact, which Matt will talk a little bit more about in the feasibility section. The first being, though, if we increase access to schools, this is huge. And this is something that through our stakeholder engagement you'll see the little mandatory sticker on it. And it was something that was found to be necessary because these schools are all across the city and they have great access. So being able to work with the local school boards across the city and working with the city itself as a municipality to gain more consistent access is really important. We have a notable example here, and it's highlighted in our case studies in the full document itself, the Stratford Basketball Association, and the way that this association works with the municipality of Stratford to get access to these schools. So this is quite important, but it's not going to solve the issue at hand fully. And so in tandem with increasing access to schools, we see that there needs to be investment and pursuit of another type of facility. And this can look very different. So we have some options up here, and I'll go through each of them. The first would be the conversion of an existing facility. So this could be something that already exists in Ottawa, and perhaps you retrofit it to meet the needs of the basketball community and the sport community, converting space and repurposing the space. We see some notable examples in different areas in the country with the Richmond Olympic Oval. Obviously, that was done for the 2010 games. But now, instead of being an oval with an ice surface, it is a multi-sport complex. It has, courts, it has turf, it has all these sorts of things. A much higher level of investment because it was for an Olympic Games, but just an example to note. And then additionally, the Edmonton Sports Centre. This is a facility that was a warehouse, and they have converted it into a basketball dominated facility. So it's a really interesting one. It is in our case studies in the full document that you can note. So that's the conversion of an existing facility. Then we have the new build, which is an alternative structure. So we're calling them alternative structures because there's a few different modalities to do this. So you could look at an air-supported dome, which if you think about, you might see them in your community. They're really common. You know, our friends at Tennis Canada do a really great job of this. We see them in soccer as well. That's an approach. A tension membrane structure, which is essentially a structure that has, steel, and then you put a tension membrane around it, kind of wrapping it. That's the photo you'll see on the slide. That's being used, and it has all sorts of uses. It's used in the sports space. It's also used, for some primary healthcare needs, which is quite interesting. And then the third is a prefabricated structure that goes by frameless structure in the sense that you don't have to have these large steel beams. It uses a paneling system that interlocks. So it helps mitigate some challenges such as soil conditions and that sort of thing. Won't get too in depth with that, but they have the ability to be in different configurations. You can have different number of courts. So that's quite interesting when you're thinking about, the amount of spend, about the amount of space that you have, all of that. And then some notable examples with that. So an air-supported dome, there's a number of them. The Athlete Institute is one specifically that uses it for basketball here in Southern Ontario. We look at tension membrane structure. You have Martensville Sports Centre, which is the main recreation center in Martensville in Saskatchewan. That's what they use. And then this prefabricated frameless structure in Minden Hills in Ontario, they have created a arena and a rec center with basketball courts using this. So there's a lot of different options in the alternative structure category. And then we look at the new builds, the brick and mortar, which, as you can imagine, have varying degrees of investment and that sort of thing. So building something from scratch, modeling what you want it to look like, and then creating it. So some notable examples is the Seville Center in Edmonton. Many people on the call may have heard about it. It's a massive facility. It has, over 10 basketball courts, a number that can be transitioned into volleyball. It's a premier kind of hosting sports facility. You have the Toronto Pan Am Center, the Meridian Center in Niagara region. And then last one here is the Calgary Fieldhouse, which is in its project stages. It's similar to our report in the sense that they do the specs and that sort of thing. And we had used it to kind of look at some comparables and that sort of thing, but it also is quite interesting of what they're trying to build there. So to reiterate, we need schools provide us a lot of access to community level basketball and grassroots, which is really key, but also it does not meet the need with where it's at. So in tandem with that, looking at the increasing infrastructure through the development of some alternative facility when we need to pursue both of those options together. So anchoring back to the 3 lines of inquiry that I've been going over, when we think about the first one, just kind of top line key insights is that the infrastructure in Ottawa is failing to meet the demand, and growing participation continues to strain the system, especially with indoor courts not being prioritized. The second one is regarding meeting the needs for hosting opportunities. The current approach to hosting is quite piecemeal and requires a lot of improvisation, and it's a bit more reactive. So this model is becoming increasingly unsustainable, and it could result in a loss of future hosting opportunities, which is important to note. And then the last one is what options exist to increase infrastructure with a focus on the merit of a new purpose-built facility. There's multiple different pathways, as you just heard me chat about, and each offering different levels of investment, but nonetheless important and kind of vital to look into and to pursue. So then looking at, I mentioned a number of case studies, and our case studies provide a lot of insight and potential resource for folks on the call, to contact these individuals, to ask more questions. So you'll see that we had 6 case studies specifically. So the Stratford Basketball Association, which I mentioned previously, the City of Calgary and their Fieldhouse study, the City of Martensville and their sprung structure, the Athlete Institute as well, Edmonton Sports Centre, and then the Seville Community Centre. So you can see on the graphics kind of what this looks like in the report itself, going through some of the notable findings that they offer, and and different approaches that keep their facility sustainable and being able to run effectively, as well as, perhaps some best in class things that they are doing that have allowed them to create this and maybe are a bit more creative. But in this approach to something that perhaps creativity and working together and collaboratively is something that we all need. And so these are examples of how to go forward and do it. And hopefully will be very useful for the folks using this final document in their future. So that takes us to where we're at is our primary feasibility. So I will hand it over to Matt now to go through the approach to feasibility and to dive into the numbers a little bit more.
Awesome. Thanks, Emily. And thanks again, everyone, for being on the call. As Emily's going through the case studies and data and example, it just reminds me so much of, the consistent themes that we're hearing through this work, which is that these reports, it's a phase in time. It's intended to help be a benefit and a resource for you all, and for folks who want to be part of the opportunity and part of the change. So a lot of insights there that we've used and drawn in different ways, but we've tried to make exhaustive and available, so folks have those to draw on. So now it's kind of my turn to have the mic for a bit and want to talk about, the approach that we took to feasibility. Feasibility is also a journey. If you're working on a project like this, you're going to go through multiple phases of determining your opportunity and building your schematics and more accurately costing as you go through. That's just normal in processes like this. It takes time and it takes rounds of business casing to get to your precise opportunity. So what we wanted to do when we did this work was kind of zoom out and look at all the different ways that one can go at this and start to provide that base level assessment and that content that everyone could use as a starting point to accelerate and help you or anyone who wants to take projects like this on feel like they could have a springboard to jump off of and something to leverage and come back to as a guidepost. So based on the alternatives and options that Emily just shared, that's what we went and looked at. So we looked at, what does it mean and what would be the benefit of school collaboration? What would that look like? And then we looked at different, and we used 50,000 square foot as a bit of a proxy, mostly because it could accommodate 4 FIBA-sized courts, which also aligns. FIBA and IWBF have similar standards with respect to spacing and clearance, etc. So we felt it was sufficient size to allow for a 4-court facility that can be leveraged both for community and for hosting. Later in the doc, before we end today, we'll also point you to a resource where we summarize some of those best practices. But that was kind of embedded in each of the potential build or refurbish options. We looked at each of what we've kind of called the alternative structures. So the dome, membrane, and prefabricated frameless. We looked at new build. When we looked at new build, we actually let ourselves look at an A and a B. An A, which was the 50,000 square foot, and a B, which was, a roughly 115,000 square foot structure that would allow you to have potentially 8 courts in it, which would provide even more opportunity when it comes to the degree to which it could host events. And then because we don't want to lose it, we don't want to forget that there could be refurbishment opportunities as well. Those are very hard to find a normal for and a typical for because it's going to be very situation dependent. But we wanted that in the consideration set as folks thought about that, because if there is an existing structure that you could go to and work with and refurbish what's there, that could accelerate your timelines, that could save you cost, and you might be able to tap into existing amenities. So we don't want to lose sight of that, but harder to have a standard assessment for beyond more of the kind of broad strokes that were mentioned. So then when we looked at each of these alternatives, we wanted to consider it through a variety of ways when we thought of feasibility, because it's not just the financial feasibility, because again, that's going to be in part dependent on the situation, those who are backing it, et cetera, what their thresholds are. But we looked first at what is the merit from a strategic standpoint. So how does it help us solve for opening up capacity for community basketball as well as hosting opportunities? What's the kind of CapEx that might be required to build something like this? And we'll get into that in more detail. What are the ways that you could try to get funding to support your initiative? And what are the different benefits? And we've already started talking about those through the content today, but what are the ways that you could look at benefits more from like a business case standpoint, that you could help to quantify the return on investment for projects such as these. So that was the framing and that was the lens through which we conducted this round of feasibility assessment. And I emphasize round because there should be more rounds as folks go to take on projects like this. So let's just start broadly with strategic merit, and talk to each of the different options. And do want to say off the top, each of these options has merit. There's an argument you could make for any of these options as to how it will help be part of the solve. But want to emphasize that as well. There's probably no one singular solve here to accelerate the community and hosting. Perhaps on the highest end, the largest investment, the kind of 115,000 square foot structure, that would go a long way. But even that won't solve the community needs as well. We do need to think of a multitude of options. When we think about school access, the merit is the reach through the city. In theory, it wouldn't require new land. It does align to no or low cost programming, and that's important because we want to make sure that it's not just more basketball. That includes more programs that have accessible pricing, and that are in accessible locations. And throughout all these options that are accessible in their structure itself. Air supported dome, that is a proven solution in multiple sports. It's definitely a lower cost option. It's a quicker build out, but it will require trade-offs. There's a couple of key ones that make it less attractive, particularly from a more competitive basketball standpoint or hosting tournaments, in that it's not as practical to have hung nets. So that's a bit of a limitation. And it also isn't practical to have hardwood floors. So you need more like sport court flooring based on just the structure itself and what it would have from a humidity standpoint or moisture in the space. Tension membrane structure and prefabricated frameless structure. Both of these also are relatively quicker to build than a brick and mortar. They're relatively less expensive. And they have their own trade-offs. They have longer lifespans than an air supported dome. When you think about how long you could get out of the structure itself. And both are going to get you a little bit closer to being able to have hardwood, being able to have hung nets, those sorts of things. And then brick and mortar, that's going to allow for the most customization. It's going to allow for the highest degree of having all of the aspects that one would probably want for if you wanted to kind of check every box of what would make a great facility. The challenge there becomes, the funding required. It's also the most expensive option. The lead time required. It also is probably the longest lead time of the bunch. And then refurbishment we've already talked to. Again, there's advantages to this if you can find the right situation. It's going to be quicker. It's probably less overall CapEx required, but it's very, very situation dependent. And I don't want to belabor this, but I do want to call it out, and we'll show it in a couple moments again as well when we look at some of the pros and cons. When we consulted with the community and had our focus group, we brought some of these options forward. We brought all of these options forward, actually, except for the frameless structure, which came from the room during that conversation. But by and large, it was pretty universal of the folks that we spoke to that an air-supported dome was seen as the least attractive option. People didn't say it shouldn't be pursued, but they said on a relative basis it was the least attractive option because it couldn't have hardwood floor, and the humidity in the dome and the lack of ability to hang nets, it just isn't necessarily the thing that's going to get us closest to the kind of objectives we have. So again, don't want to belabor that or discourage someone who wants to pursue that alternative because there's merit on a cost and timeline standpoint. And there are proven track records in sport and even some interesting funding options. But it was one that the community said was, if the one was ranked least attractive, that was the one ranked least attractive, clearly, by the group. So let's start with schools, going a little bit deeper. And, there's a lot on this slide. And the good news is when you visit the site and you download the document, you'll be able to go through line by line, but I'm going to respect your time today and not do that. But what I do want to point to in this slide is that, first of all, if you just look at the top right, that's an example, a map where each of those kind of red dots with the white center represents a venue that was used for hosting in 2025 the U14 Boys OBA Cup. That's 30 venues that were made available, that were made work in this situation. And again, like, while we're looking for opportunity to improve and to create more infrastructure and to alleviate strain, want to also thank the folks who make that happen, because it's not always the easiest thing to do, but the community did it, right? So we don't want to lose track of that. And when we look at this chart, yes, we see that it would take 1 hour to go from, end to end, which is not easy, and which does create strain. It also creates logistical challenges if there was an issue and you needed someone to, in an official capacity, to get to one side to another. Those are logistical challenges that we absolutely should keep trying to resolve. But we also see opportunity in this map, because when we think about schools, this map might suggest 30 opportunities for us to find a way to work with school boards to get more access and be strategic about, maybe it's going to be hard for us to get access to all schools, but what if we could triage? What if we could find a way to work with our local school boards to get preferred access to these 30 that we know at least have been able to be viable for us in a tournament hosting capacity? All that to say, also don't want to move past the fact that during consultation, it was recognized, we heard from those we spoke to, that there was a lot of challenges when it came to working with schools in terms of ownership, accountability, and making sure that folks who got access felt that they were getting the same level of access and the same conditions that other community users were getting. So there's work to be done here, but there's also opportunity to be had. And again, what we're putting forth is that we shouldn't stop pursuing that, even if we start to see more developments and more facilities available. Schools, if we can crack this code, will make basketball more readily available for the community in locations distributed across the community that have nearby amenities. So we think that that's important for the objective that we set out to achieve. But as Emily said, and as I've repeated, it's kind of a schools plus. Let's keep the effort on schools and not lose sight of that. But that alone won't solve what we're trying to do either. And this sport has great potential. And if we want that potential to be realized, we do think we need to be considering, and we need folks to, take up that mantle to try to build facilities that were intended for basketball. Again, won't go through the pros and cons of each of these line by line, but just to give you a flavor, we're looking at things like the relative capex. We're looking at things like the relative timeline. We're looking at, like, if we could find a proven use case. We're looking at added complexity, insurance and finance considerations, its overall appearance, the scale of the operation itself and the complexity that might be introduced, the timelines, etc. We mapped those so anyone looking to take on an initiative like this has a bit of a cheat sheet to start with. And these things will grow over time. 5 years from now, someone resourcing this document, there's probably advancements made for any of these options. But you've got a really great starting point here. And the net of it is, any of these facilities can help from a community basketball standpoint. If we could get access to an air-supported dome on a sport court flooring that allowed, more kids to play the sport at a recreational level at accessible pricing, we're winning. That's a good thing for us. That might not do as much from a hosting standpoint. It might limit the degree to which we can do that, the degree of the strain to which it would alleviate, but it would advance community basketball. And all of these options have the ability to do so. The one that really does the most alleviation for both is the larger brick and mortar. But we'll show you towards the end how even, one of the alternative structures and the tension membrane or the prefabricated or the smaller brick and mortar would still make it easier to host larger scale tournaments. So again, this is a resource you have that you could go in and leverage. And the star ratings, that was based on the consultation we had and folks kind of sitting in this document and coming back and saying which were the most preferred alternatives. More stars, more preferred, less stars, less preferred. Then when we think of CapEx really here varies widely. And again, where we are in a process like this one is it's called an order of magnitude assessment. So the goal is really to be able to like outline the order of magnitude from lowest cost to highest cost from a CapEx perspective. Our range is wide because the options are wide. And this is all based on the concept of a 50,000 square foot facility up to an 115,000 brick and mortar. And we're seeing the options range from about $7.5 to $100 million as a result of that. When you go into the document, you'll see more detail on this. This is even a clipping of even more detail that's available, where we've looked at what's the alternative, what's the projected CapEx. We have included a square foot estimate as well, because that's often I bet a lot of people on the call are very familiar with this already. But when you're looking at a project like this, you're getting those preliminary estimates often in a cost per square foot and in a range that then you can start to get your head around and plan. And as you get more specific, your costs get more specific. But we've got our CapEx ranges there. You can see how those shake out across the different alternatives. Then we've included like what's the potential life cycle of that asset. And then we've included if there was an available benchmark. And for each of these, we have an available benchmark. Some of the benchmarks are older in time. So like obviously cost has increased from 2021 to 2026. That's, in construction, that's quite common. But we've guided to a bunch of different points as well that folks can leverage and resources that you can go to say, hey, what's a comparable facility? And, while we put this here for the spirit of an available cost benchmark, if you're working on an initiative and you're considering an air supported dome, depending on, where you are in your process, you might contact the Credit Union Summerside Sports Dome and talk to them. You might take a visit out there and see it for yourself. But you have some resources now that are comparables that you can draw on. And again, you can see here, they're arranged from, the least costly to the most costly. The last thing I would just say here is school access. Just like brick and mortar refurbishment is kind of situation specific, so is school access. That might be a very, very nominal cost, or there might be a way to look strategically with the school board and the community to make some targeted investments, which I think has been discussed at times in past, in exchange for more secured access at preferred times, et cetera. So there could be opportunities there to be considered, but it's harder to express in the comparable way that the other options have been. So that's the CapEx that's available. And again, you can look in the document, you'll see more sources, you'll see more reference points. And again, we mentioned the Calgary Fieldhouse study. That was a great benefit to us. And hopefully there's other folks in comparables that are looking at this study, and that's a great benefit to them. So everyone's helping each other across the country. But there's a bunch of touch points you can use to get your head around the potential CapEx implications. And then to take that next step to go from beyond an order of magnitude to something more specific based on, your specific parameters. One of the other things we were tasked with and is important to do is look at, okay, what are ways you could help get funding for projects like this? So we did that. And maybe if we just go right to the next slide, Emily, can point you to a couple resources that exist. So this is not on the slide to test your vision because you probably won't be able to read it in detail. But do want to flag for each of those options, we went and looked at what are the public funding mechanisms available by way of grants. So there's 7 different types of grants that we looked at. And, we've summarized based on what is accurate at, January 2026, how these grants are administered, what would qualify and what wouldn't, what would be the range of funding available, what are the other conditions attached to that. Sometimes there's like cost share requirements. So the grant can only fund X amount and it requires other funding, et cetera, which is really smart planning from a financial sustainability standpoint. And then we took those options and we gave a bit of a barometer of, where it's clear that it wouldn't be eligible, where it's clear that it would be, and where it's like it might be and it depends, because sometimes it comes down to the specifics and you might be able to have a well-crafted submission that would break through, or you might, be deemed as we get what you're trying to do here, but it's not exactly the intent of this grant. So again, the goal here is that anyone going to do a project like this don't then have to go start from scratch to look at the potential funding mechanisms. they could come here and resource this chart and have a head start to it. And then we did include a couple of comparable examples that gained certain grants. So Whitby Sport Complex getting the Green and Inclusive Community Buildings grant to help their build, or the Alexander Community Center getting the CSRIF Stream 2 grant to help them upgrade that community center as well. So again, the point of these examples isn't to say that was a great choice or not. Any investment in sport infrastructure we think is a great thing, but it was just to, again, if you're like, okay, what's maybe in org, if I'm applying for this grant, I could place a call to the Whitby Sport Complex and say, I'm applying for this grant. Do you have any advice you want to give me about what helped you in that process? Like, it's all about, treating this like a team sport, using the resources that are available. If we go to the next slide, grants is one aspect. There's other examples across the country of finding other ways. So naming rights for a facility, the city of Brampton did that with Save Max Real Estate. It's a $2.5 million naming rights deal. That's an interesting inspiration. If you're doing a facility, you might consider selling sponsorship of that facility. And there are publicly available benchmarks such as this one that you could look to. Again, you might be inclined to reach out and get more information from them on their specifics of what they gave, but at least it gives you a touch point to think about it. Okay, if I want this thing to be sustainable and funded and be able to provide accessible priced basketball to the community, I want to go get some funding for my naming rights. The middle example is the Austin and Victor Alberta Tennis Center. What's really impressive about this tennis center is it's a 70,000 square foot facility. And it has a mix of indoor and outdoor courts. And they were able to actually fund about 2/3 of the project, the initial build, through donors. So they had about 100 individuals and families come forward and help support that. And that's common in this world as well. It's not a guarantee that you would get it, but it's not, it is something that is commonly practiced of canvassing your local community to see if you can get some donors to help be part of a legacy project such as a facility would be. And then, it's also commonplace that a lot of these facilities will charge advertising rates and let local organizations put up banners and signs and have access to your facility or be on the website related to booking time, all those sorts of things. So again, this is not exhaustive because this type of content is always fluid, but it helps point you in direction of the things you could be thinking about that you could leverage. And then the other thing that we wanted to table was the P3 process. It's a process that's been used in Ottawa for a variety of facilities, to our knowledge, not for a basketball facility as of yet, but something that would bring public and private together to help, make funding more possible. And there's a well-defined process, and we've included the link of where to go to get all of the details, but we've summarized it. So again, if you wanted a bit of a cheat sheet to start to look at how I might be able to tap into that, that is available to you as well in this document. So then, the last part of our feasibility, mapping was around the social and economic benefits. And we'll just call out our inherent bias that we focus in the world of sport because we're a group that thinks that great business can deliver great social good, and we think there's nothing better than sport for that when it's at its best. But there's many resources available to you that would support the beliefs that I just conveyed that we have here. And through the help of our friends at Ottawa Tourism, and very much appreciate them and everyone in this process, we were able to look at, if we had a facility that could host certain OBA events, it was about $8 million in economic value that could be generated for the city. That doesn't include, because it's hard to quantify, one thing we know today is members of the community regularly have to leave the community for tournaments and weekend events that otherwise could be in Ottawa if we had a facility. It's hard to quantify that part, but we know it to be true. We know that there's dollars leaving the city that could stay in the city, and folks we could pull in for the non-larger scale tournaments as well. So for anyone looking at their specific models on this, that is very logical to build in your assumptions, and you should speak with the Ottawa Basketball Network and the OBA about those opportunities. So again, when you look in the document, you'll see kind of how we map this. On the left is a little clipping of the specific events we looked at to get to the $8 million. Below that, we also cite, and I think I saw Wendy on the call. Wendy, congrats on all the great work your folks are doing as you're getting ready for this amazing event. But you can see as well the projected economic impact of hosting the IWBF World Wheelchair Basketball Championships is $20+ million. So there's a lot of merit for when we have facilities that help support the people out there building the sport of basketball in all its forms. There's direct economic impact that can be calculated using industry standard tools. So it's real quantifiable elements you can bring forward. We also included, with credit to and referenced as such in the document, information that was available in the Calgary Fieldhouse study, because they had mapped a variety of sports that they were looking at in the Fieldhouse. So it gives other range of, oh, here's some other things that could be quantifiable. Here's some other events, volleyball, etc., that one could look at. The other element that's clipped on this sheet is the specifics for the other ways you could help justify your ROI. There's a number of calculators, there's a number of resources that one could look at across social and economic indicators. So, for anyone doing something like this, you've got a cheat sheet here to say, hey, what's the best argument I think I can make for my facility? Don't start from scratch. Come to this document, find this table, and click through to some of the links or otherwise resource some of the tools that have been referenced. Okay, so before we kind of summarize again the recommendations, the other thing that we included was just like best practice for a purpose-built facility. And this was sourced from case studies, survey input, consultation, and focus group. So again, this isn't a blueprint to plug and play here because there's so much required. It's so situation specific, but this is a good cheat sheet to start with to say a great facility that would serve the needs of the basketball community and would set up to be a sustainable operation should include the following things on the court and off the court to make sure it's a really accessible, inclusive facility that's going to meet the needs that you have for growing the sport of basketball. So again, this is in the document and it's something that could be referenced. Okay, so think getting to the end of speaking here, you're probably tired of my voice, but just bear with me for a couple more minutes. So, Emily touched on these off the top, but now that we've kind of gone through the content, it's a great chance to kind of come back to these. So first of all, on the left, not to represent it because we've talked about it a lot, but we know basketball is an amazing sport. It's one of Canada's fastest growing sports, and it's especially popular amongst diverse Canadians, youth, girls, folks with a disability. This is a sport that reaches so many when it's available, right? It creates touch points to bring so many in, and how important is that in today's Canada? Very important. Ottawa's basketball community, again, we're hearing direct from those we speak to. Everyone's supportive of the idea that there is demand, there's sustained demand, there's untapped demand. The idea that there's 70% boys versus 30% girls, what an opportunity. There's probably growth available on both sides, but what an opportunity, particularly as pro women's sport and the Toronto Tempo takes to the court later this year. Yet we know that the city's indoor infrastructure isn't there to meet the demand. And again, we understand that that's how a lot of cities plan for basketball. So we understand that Ottawa is not unique in that respect, but has the same challenge that many communities are facing. We know that an investment in basketball has economic, social, and health benefits that will benefit multiple communities, as we've talked about, because the sport can reach so many. We also know that building this kind of infrastructure does tie to some of the goals explicitly laid out by the city's municipal sports strategy and some of the city's sport tourism objectives. And probably most importantly in all of this, we know that without people, without champions to lead these kinds of efforts, we won't have the kind of change that we're seeking to have. So everyone on this call is a potential champion that could help move this forward. Not all of you might go take projects onto yourself, but you might be able to help someone who is. And that's really important. Again, change is a team sport, development's a team sport, hopefully there's folks on this call that are actually like on that path of, I want to take a serious look at creating such a facility. And hopefully everyone else who's not on that point is, I want to help that person who does. If we don't have that, it will not happen. It's so important. That is what's needed. Champions to drive this forward are essential. So therefore our recommendations, kind of maybe segued and already said it, but like, we need champions. We need folks who take this on, and take it from here and write their version of a document that takes it to their specifics. Or folks who want to continue to feed resources in and reach out to, Francis and provide any other resources that might be available. The second one is, and we talked on it, the city of Ottawa should name basketball as one of the priority sports. We understand that there's many priorities, but given the communities that basketball reaches, given we didn't even have time today to touch to the rich history that Ottawa has from a basketball standpoint, James Naismith's connection to the city, the potential for sport tourism related to that, the diplomacy that exists in the city of Ottawa, and in how Ottawa is the capital of our country, and basketball is one of Canada's fastest growing sports. Ottawa, we're not asking to be the priority. We think the sport should be a priority in the indoor sport court strategy. What that means and the committed actions, obviously need to work for the city too, but we think it merits that kind of consideration, and we hope this document is a valuable resource for the city in developing such strategy. The third reco is investing in purpose-built infrastructure. We think all of the options are worth considering. We don't want to rule out the dome. We understand the dome is the least attractive from the community standpoint. But if you're interested in doing this, or a group of folks are interested in doing this, take that next level with more specifics to see, what each of these options could mean for you, because they all have an argument that could be made for them, and a purpose-built facility would help. Fourth, that purpose-built facility needs to be designed intentionally. If we wanted to meet the needs of diverse Canadians that we know this sport appeals to across many identities, it starts with meeting with those folks and bringing them in the beginning. Don't bring them in at the end. When you go look at the resource in the document, we're going to underscore that in a big way. But if you want the facility to meet the needs of girls and women, meet with girls and women in the beginning. Don't wait till all of your designs are done and then have consultation with those groups. You'll miss things. It's so important, and that was underscored by our friends at Canadian Women in Sport who participated in this work as well. Not, for girls and women, but for people of many identities. That's very important. And it's best practice to meet with those groups and bring them into the design, because you're going to learn things that make it harder working. And then when that facility is up and running, those communities are going to want to be there. So you're going to create that opportunity for yourself. And the last one here is, we have to keep trying with schools and school boards. We know it's hard for a lot of very rational, logical reasons, but there's opportunity here. That map, yes, it shows the complexity and current state of how hard it is and the strain it puts on folks. And yes, it's not an easy answer, but it's a lot of potential that could make sure that basketball is more readily available in communities all across the National Capital Region. So, we just want to reiterate that we know that's hard. The degree of difficulty on that is challenging, but it's absolutely worth pursuing. And the last one here, just to bring it home, is just, if we think about, one location doesn't solve it all. But if you did have a four-court location, that means you could basically have your final day games at that facility, and you cut down, instead of having to spread at 14 or 15 or 16 facilities, you could probably get closer to 9 facilities. You could optimize your schedule. You could make it more possible for convening, which opens up opportunities for community building, and also opens up opportunities for merchandise and food and gathering, which is part of what sport offers to unlock those economic benefits. And it makes it easier on those organizing, making it better executed and safer for everyone who competes. So a really simple schematic, but hopefully that hits home for folks. So yeah, in close, hopefully what you found in this presentation, hopefully what you find when you visit the site and download the document, is that the business case validates that there's a need here. There's an opportunity. and there's potential ways forward to meet that need and realize that opportunity. So I'm going to stop talking and pass the mic back to Emily.
Yeah, so as I mentioned in the beginning, we have saved some time at the end for questions, so I can stop sharing my screen now, and we'll open the floor up to all the wonderful people on this call. We know we threw a lot at you. There's a lot of details there, so we have some time now to answer some questions, and I already see a hand up, which is great. Matthew.
Thank you, Emily. Just want to recognize the amount of information you've captured. I think it's very impressive, the engagement, the connections, and overall tying it all together. It's, I think a lot of us are involved in sports somehow who are on the call, but I think sort of presentation could also be done in a broader way at different tables for folks who have no link to sport or no link to the actual challenge, but had a better understanding. So really want to commend the delivery and the reflection that's gone into this. I think it will bear. I really hope that it bears fruits and solidifies local leadership. I guess one reflection, and maybe this is my bias internal view of some of our systems, but the issues with access to school, in my mind, in certain jurisdictions, particularly in the States, you go to the city and fix the school issue. But, as we've seen, right, the Minister of Education in Ontario, Minister Calandra, has been quite involved in, stewarding some of the government's directions on the way it wants school boards to run. And frankly, they've been silent on the asset component, which I think is a unique opportunity. I guess I just want to further hear I've been at those tables, I've brought the school boards together, I've talked about renewing of community use of schools more broadly, when I was sports commissioner, and I'm a little, I guess, over the top on thinking that that's the way to solve it, because there was a legacy where the city used to run allocations within gyms, and that's failed. And I think the only way to renew that is not by the people moving along. It's actually for the province to redefine what are the community use of schools it desires for the future. And then I think there's local leadership that can really reshape it. So I don't want to give my grain of salt. Obviously, I have a biased view in it, but maybe if you could further explain, we see the potential of those gyms that are there in schools. You're very articulate in describing that, hey, this is a untapped potential of solidifying, growing, and really being an existing asset that can be extended. But I guess I challenge a bit of the governance components when we've not been successful in entertaining any of the progress directly through the school boards. And frankly, one of our biggest school boards is under stewardship. So with a CFO whom we all respect, I'm sure at the helm, they're talking about dropping expenses. These things are too peripheral for them. It sounds weird to say, but it's tough. So anyways, I monopolize a lot of the time for what is a really substantive, great report. Because we've brought back, the idea, which I think is an important piece of community use, I think I'd like to explore that a bit further or hear your perspective on why this is the right approach and venue.
Do you want to take that one?
Sure. Yeah. So great question. Appreciate it. We know it's not a simple answer here, and we know that it's been tried in the past and it hasn't necessarily yielded the kind of benefit we want. But also we know that we exist in schools today, right? So so maybe there's some modest improvements that can be done in terms of the access that we get today. The document actually includes a little bit more of a list in terms of the kinds of things that you would want to go to the school boards and try to secure. And it won't happen overnight. And we understand it can be in part based on, governance and who's in leadership and kind of what their priorities are. But where this came for us to really kind of emphasize it was one that it's just practical that in a lot of instances that is still what we rely on when we host tournaments. We still rely on schools, so trying to make it better makes sense. But also in talking to Stratford basketball, they've developed a really good relationship with their local school boards and their local basketball association, and they've been able to reach advantageous terms for both, where there's a bit of reciprocal gain and everyone benefits in certain ways. So while we know the city is unique and while we know it's not a slam dunk, that it's unnecessarily going to yield immediate, we felt important that it's there and tabled, and there's some constructive ideas on what we could ask for. That's also though why we didn't say that it unto its own is going to do it, and that we need to keep pursuing, and the city needs to get involved and make basketball part of the indoor court sports strategy, because we can't be reliant on schools. Can we make them better? Yes, but it can't be the sole solution. And we really try to emphasize that in the document in many places, maybe just not as evident in today's presentation. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you.
Thanks. Then we have another hand up, Matthew.
Hi there. It's Matt Reason from Razor Management Inc. Based out of Toronto. We've got 10 sports facilities across Ontario, ranging from mostly soccer, got one basketball. Most of them are public-private partnerships with school boards and a few municipalities. I just want to say thanks for putting this together. I think there's definitely pieces in there that are helpful, probably to everyone. That said, there wasn't much talk about when I look at or consider projects, I do a quick back of the envelope number crunching, and from a court fee standpoint, I don't know what, Emily or Matthew, do you have a number as to what's the high end for a one court rental fee for an hour in the city of Ottawa? So for a nice court, what would a group be paying for that hour if they were a for-profit organization? So not if it was market rate, so to speak.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So from when we talk to folks, it ranged, and this is in the full document as well. Like from some school, talking about school specifically, rentals are say $50. Others can go up to $150 for more of the top end facilities. So that is in there. So I guess it would probably be about $150. But when we actually did ask that in one of our focus groups about appetite for especially more competitive teams, and there was notion that they would be open to paying a little bit more than that to get access, because access is becoming such an issue. So I would say around the 150 mark, with a little bit of openness. If we were to have a great facility that meets all the requirements and everything like that, folks would be willing to look at their budgets and say, okay, we want to book some of these spaces because we know how beneficial it is going to be to our teams. And then we also highlight in the fulsome document, not just, we talk a lot about the youth space here and youth programming, which is very important, but there's also, the adult rec leagues and adult sports leagues. So when we think about who could rent these spaces in the fulsome document, we have a list of potential groups, whether that's say the Brody League or other, more competitive adult leagues, so it creates a bit of option. And even in, pursuing something like this, maybe it is reaching out to, as you're trying to figure out your tenancy and who you're going to have anchor tenants and who those folks are, considering some of these leagues that have quite a substantial number of participants and who would really use the courts at a regular basis, year round. Does that answer your question?
It does to a certain degree. I just on this call, I put together some basic kind of math from our 10 facilities, our experience. Yeah. If you have a sports facility that has 4 courts and it's open Monday to Friday after school hours, which are when kids and parents are able to play sport. So if your facility was open from 10 o'clock until 5 o'clock to 11 o'clock at night, that's 6 hours a night times 5 days in a week. That's 30 hours. Assume Saturday and Sunday, 8 in the morning until 11. That's another 30 hours. So in a given week, there's 60 hours in a week. If you had 4 courts, I used an average of $125 an hour. So $125 an hour times 4 courts times 60 hours in a week, times a 90% occupancy, it's $27,000 a week. $27,000 a week times 40 weeks in a year, it's $1.1 million in revenue. And if you spend $20 million on a new facility, and that was all being financed, your interest costs at 6.5% would be $1.3 million. So you're not even paying your interest costs in terms of, let alone staffing, insurance, maintenance, repaying your principal, return on investment, all of these things. And that assumes that you get the land for free, which I think you could through a school board or a municipality. It's just the math is extremely challenging. And I think that's one of the biggest barriers in terms of why there isn't more appetite from, whether it's the private sector or even the public sector, it's really challenging to make the numbers work. I'm a basketball fan. I grew up in Ottawa. I played at basketball for the Ottawa Guardsmen and Earl of March. I'd love to build a forecourt facility in Ottawa. It's just wrapping my head around, okay, how do you build an amazing facility and even come close to breaking even? I think if I could break even, I would do it, but it's extremely challenging.
Yeah, well, Matt, thanks for that. And I think like the purpose of this call, like I appreciate you raising that quick back of the envelope, and perhaps like good to connect offline and you can share that and we can provide that info to anyone who wants to, take up this business case. When we talk to other facilities, like facilities have made it work. They've made it profitable on their side. There are examples of that in this country. There's also, in that case, like in the business case document points to this, where, we're saying purpose built for basketball, but you wouldn't be solely reliant on basketball. You would have other community programming. Other organizations have found ways to run nonprofits during certain hours, to bring in adult community during certain hours, to host volleyball tournaments and basketball tournaments. So while I appreciate what you've laid out and it's very helpful, I don't want the takeaway for folks on the call to be cold water on the idea. I'm not sure if there's much else you had to add beyond that, but if you want to share that info, I think it's great. We should make it available to people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's just just from somebody who's looked at this numerous times. And I think that one of the other challenges, and I don't know whether you guys can help out with this, is I'll give you an example of Downsview Park 2 years ago. They came out with an RFP to build a multi-sport facility, and they were 4 shortlisted candidates from across North America. We were one of them, and we were the only ones who ultimately submitted a bid because it was the time and effort and the requirements to go through this process. We spent a couple $100,000 doing it, hiring architects and what have you. And at the end of the day, Canada Lands decided to go in a different direction. And it's one of these things where there's a lot of chicken and egg things where it's like, you can't build a facility hoping to sell naming rights or hoping to get a grant, and you can't get a grant without a facility and a lease in place. So I think that's, one of the challenges for a lot of people who are interested in supporting basketball, is it's this chicken and egg thing where if you found a location and said, hey, we have a partner who has land and we're going to help in terms of from a funding standpoint, like that would probably go a long way in terms of extra help. And I'm not sure where or how you guys would fit in, but just food for thought. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, thank you very much. I see another hand up. Mike from North Pole Hoops.
Hi, everybody. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. First off, I appreciate this. I think this is much needed within the Ottawa region. The growth of basketball is immense right now. For someone like myself, I've been in the industry for about 15 years on the North Pole Hoop side. We deal with a lot of youth basketball development, exposure, and trying to give in the platform that these kids really deserve on the elite level basketball side. We're actually hosting an event February, I believe it was January 31st to February 1st at Carleton University. Our first event that's coming out there to start with the Eastern expansion for us. So the goal for North Pole Hoops is we really want to start bringing the provinces together And, for us on the Eastern Conference side, we're looking at the Kingston all the way up to a PEI. But we do need these type of facilities that are able to host the elite level performance that we're looking for. So something at a bare minimum if we're looking to build a 4-court FIBA facility. But, you go down to, the pricing and the breakdown per hour. If you're looking at just like that, you're kind of ignoring the other factors of sponsorship that goes into it, the gym rental possibilities of weight room and training, as well as the kitchen capabilities of it as well. There's so many different revenue streams that go into it. And I know you guys said, it's important to have drivers. You got to have drivers to run this type of facility as a business that knows the basketball community. And I think that's super, super important. And understanding that, there are key times to get rid of gym time, but pickleball is massive right now during the day. There are different prep programs that run high level performance during the school time. We're in Burlington, Ontario. We have a facility called the Burlington Playground, and we run it with IBSA, Burlington Force. They have Polaris Prep. They run their school out of there. And we're working with a program right now called Ottawa Elite, who is now getting into the prep program side. And they're looking to do more of that online schooling, but in a facility brick and mortar form. So, as much as we want this to happen, I've talked to a lot of people when it comes to the Ottawa space. And it's just, a lot of talk. How do we keep moving this forward? How do we get the proper drivers to execute this side of it? Because, part of that presentation, again, fantastic presentation, a lot of awareness when it comes to it. 14 locations for 16 gyms is insane. It's insane to run something as a business like what we do. OBA could subsidize X amount or wherever it would be, but it's not enticing for someone like North Pole Hoops to come out there and try to run something to provide a different platform opportunity for these kids to get seen and pushed to the next level. So, there's different ways of how to approach this, but, just so everybody knows on this call, there's a couple of people that I've recognized just through it and listening. We're coming out there. We really want to provide some stability, professionalism, a safe environment for this sport. And basketball is just on the rise. So, I make it very easy for teams to come down to the GTA, travel-wise, help with them when it comes to their budgets. But there's a more and more demand to bring the Quebec side over to Ottawa, the Nova Scotias, the New Brunswicks coming to Ottawa to participate where it's easy travel. And if we can execute what we do here in GTA as seamlessly over there and create a new hub, let's say, it has to start with a facility that is under the right leadership. It's a no-brainer to do. And for us as a business, we've done this already many, many times. Like we're looking to build something here in Ontario that could potentially be an 8 to 12 court facility, something that hasn't been seen in Canada, but is a norm in the States. So you got to do this properly, and it's important that we do this with the right people, with the right mindset for the kids and the growth of the basketball community. But I just wanted to touch base on all this. But thank you so much for presenting this and doing the case study.
Thank you, Mike. That's really helpful insight and, on what's to come and also, what you folks, as you advance your programming, are looking for and needing, and creating another hub in Ontario would be fantastic. Are there any, knowing that we only have a couple minutes left, are there any final last questions? I see that some people are conversing in the chat here. I won't go through and read them all out, but I appreciate, your insights, David and JC, Leo, Mark. Thank you for kind of chiming in and providing some context around the conversations that we've had thus far in our Q&A. Any final questions? Doesn't seem to be. Okay. Francis, any final thoughts before we wrap up the call?
Just to thank both you and Matt for this project, all the work you've put in, and obviously once everyone sees the final document, the passion that went into it as well. So thanks.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you so much, everyone. Great to see this group, and look forward to seeing more basketball in Ottawa and across Canada in the years to come here.
All right.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.